We are going to be talking about the statistics when it comes to traffic accidents, South Africa's road safety, but particularly highlighting how does the freight truck industry fare. I remember the first day of my December leave, you had that horrific Boksburg tanker explosion. And then over the course of the December festive break, we've had several accidents around the country. Of course, the Department of Transport saying that we had a quieter than usual traffic accident or incident season. And that is very much something that we can applaud. But how does the South African road freight trucking industry fare? Because of an absolute destruction of our rail infrastructure, our roads and the trucks on our roads have become the veins, the blood vessels of our economy, to keep this economy still flowing, to still keep it going. So we look at how our roads look, particularly when it comes to road freight. Three guests on the line with us today. Firstly, Gavin Kelly, who is the Chief Executive of the Road Freight Association. We have Phadi, who's the President of the Truckers Association of South Africa. And then Justin Manson, who is the Sales Director at Webfleet. Webfleet is an organization that have been conducting surveys on just how South Africa's road freight industry is faring when it comes to road and accident incidents here in South Africa. I first want to bring in to Justin Mason, who is of Webfleet. Justin, thanks so much for joining us. You've had a wide-ranging look into how South Africa's road freight industry fares when it comes to accidents and incidents. What have you found over the last while in terms of the involvement of big trucks transporting our goods around the country in terms of accidents and its contribution to accident rates in this country?
We deal with the transport sector on a day-to-day basis, with what we do from a telematics perspective. And I think that, Gavin's got a lot of stats in terms of the number of road deaths that occur, especially during the busy seasons, the holiday seasons. But we don't really pinpoint what the causes are to a large extent, especially in the transport sector. So for us, it was very important to actually go out and understand what are the main causes. And I think, very high level and very quickly, for me, it wasn't really a surprise, but I think for a lot of the public, what was quite surprising is that 33% of the accidents are actually caused by other road users. This is largely due to other road users not understanding how heavy goods vehicles operate, especially a fully loaded truck or a tank or whatever the case is. Other road users don't understand how they actually work or the physics around a large heavy goods vehicle. I think, if we have a look at some of the other stats, 21% of accidents can be, put towards distracted driving, 12% driver fatigue, 7% speeding, and 7% reckless driving. That means that around 47% of road accidents in the heavy goods transport sector can actually be managed and controlled by the proper use of technology. Which is one of the conversations we're trying to start is how do we make the transport sector a lot safer with the use of technology.
Gavin, I've seen over the course of December some footage of the lines and rows of trucks trying to get into Richards Bay Harbour. When we talk about the explosion of road freight on South Africa's national highways, the Road Freight Association filling the gap of a rail infrastructure that's not there. Of course, it's very good for business, for the Road Freight Association, but there's no other option for South Africa and its economy. We have no rail freight infrastructure, so our goods have to be transported by freight trucks on our national roads, Gavin.
Yeah, Lester, that's unfortunately one of the realities of the country. I think there's many of us, definitely in the road freight sector, who are not comfortable with what's happening. There are a number of things that come to play once you start to slide down this route. And I'm not going to sit here this morning and blame who destroyed rail. I think that journey has been happening for far longer than some people want to say over the last 5 years. I think the destruction of rail is probably 30 years in the coming. Where disinvestment was happening, you can't just blame the current regime. So if you take that into consideration, then you realize that there is really only one other alternative. Well, I suppose you could put it on planes, but that might end up being quite expensive. So yeah, now we have the scenario where, for example, coal is being moved to Richards Bay through 2 provinces. Once that demand for coal, which is an international market, suddenly grew, we immediately had 3,000 to 5,000 trucks suddenly moving on roads that they normally wouldn't have moved on. And what does that mean? It means more pressure on the roads. It means that apart from the wear and tear on the roads, obviously your risk factor in terms of how different vehicles interact with other vehicles. So trucks are by nature heavy, they are by nature slow, and it's not like a small little compact SUV that when you want to stop it, you can stop it on a tikkie or a dime. A truck can't do that. And we've heard from Justin that 33% of incidents, we call them incidents, generally crashes or accidents, are caused by other road users. Now that's an important thing to remember. And now when you have these tubes of 10 kilometers long, when something goes wrong, something small goes wrong, and a couple of years ago, there was only 1 vehicle or 2 vehicles, and there was space to move it, to avoid one another. There wasn't pressures in terms of what they are today. Perhaps those incidents would have gone past without notice. Now you have a totally different scenario playing. So one of the things we need to fix, and it's not going to be quick, but we've got to do it as quickly as we can, is to get rail back to play the role it needs to play in terms of moving certain types of freight. And then secondly, we need to make sure that everyone who uses the road, whether it's a truck or a car or a pedestrian, follows the rules, and that there are consequences if you don't follow those rules. So if we know which companies are creating problems, let's deal with them.
Mary, before I get to you, Justin, I largely believe that we have a road traffic system and a cohort of drivers who are not experienced, who are not trained to particularly use major national highways. And you add to the fact of increased road freight on our roads, it becomes doubly difficult. A K53 system is largely designed to how to drive a vehicle in a suburban residential area. People aren't necessarily trained on how to use a national road, especially if you have a row of trucks, 4, 5, 6 trucks deep, and how an average driver gets to use that road along with this very, very big obstacle in front of you. Justin?
I agree. I think that the transport sector is very quick to be blamed for incidents that take place on the roads, and in many cases, 32% of the cases, it's not necessarily the case. But I do agree with you, Lester. There is certainly a need for kind of more advanced driver training in as far as the transport sector is concerned. But to me, it also goes back a long way. I remember when I was at school, road safety was part of your curriculum. It was something we were taught at school. That is no longer. So I think from a very young age, people are, you're only getting to understand the rules of the road and road etiquette and respect for the drivers when you go through driver's test. So, to me, there's a couple of things. Certainly, driver training, especially that the transport sector, is a big thing. Enforcement of the rules is massive. We need to enforce the rules, and we need to enforce them consistently, across the board. Just the lack of respect on the roads is, for me, also a massive factor, which we need to be looking at.
Mary Phadi, President of the Truckers Association of South Africa, I want to bring your perspective. Particularly, we spoke about, driver training. You heard what Justin and Gavin said, particularly looking at a lot of the accidents are not, in fact, caused by trucks and the drivers. How do you take that particular bit of information, particularly in your experience with the men and women who are in these cabs, in these trucks, on the long road for very, very long hours, trying to get South Africa's goods across the country? Your thoughts on driver training?
Yes, definitely. What we've picked up as we were engaging with the drivers is the issue of the negligence on some of the drivers, and also the small cars. they had mentioned that, you know, they tend to overtake where it is not necessary. On the other hand, you know, drivers of the passenger cars are also complaining towards the truck drivers. So I think training will be necessary for the fact that our road infrastructure might not be able to carry the number of trucks that are currently moving on the road. And therefore, you know, if you emphasize the issue of training, because they do your, you know, driver training induction, but then they don't really give themselves enough time to be able to check the route assessment where they are traveling with the goods. So that will be making sure that whenever you need to be giving these drivers a heavy vehicle, you'll be able to know that wherever they go, it depends on the route that they will be using. So that training will be necessary, and drivers will be able to take their own decisions in the correct way.
Mary, clarify something for me. From as far as I understand, truck drivers are not obligated to drive in the yellow line. In fact, there are many trucks that expressly say no yellow lane driving allowed, no driving on the shoulder allowed. And this obviously leaves many motorists frustrated, especially if that convoy of trucks are 4, 5, 6 trucks deep. Explain in terms of the road traffic legislation on whether or not truckers should be giving more space to passenger vehicles, particularly on our highways.
We need to consider the fact that our road infrastructure were not designed for the number of trucks that we have on the road. And therefore, either or, you know, operators must be able to understand that we need to accommodate motorists, because you cannot overtake 5, 6 trucks on the same time, and then you have been given an opportunity as a truck driver to drive directly on the road. You need to give them space. So it is not compared to the number of trucks that are here now. We need to have effect or a necessary discussion with regard to what is happening in our country. Like, you've got those 2 provinces where now there's quite a number of people that is going to Europe. Nobody is planning for that, and therefore you need to accommodate.
Gavin Kelly, we are still reflecting about that horrific Boksburg tanker explosion. Initially, at the start of that story, a lot of blame put on that particular driver. We can also talk about sufficient road markings. But what do you think that incident had highlighted about the public's understanding of how particularly road freight is transported around the country, and in this case, the Boksburg incident, how particularly hazardous material is transported? The explanation of that driver is that he had missed the turn, he had been on the line with his coordinator, he had personally inspected whether this particular crossing would be able to clear it, but there was no markings whatsoever. What does that incident tell us about the public's understanding of how goods and hazardous material is transported in this country?
Lester, I'm not going to go into the merits of the case. It's obviously being investigated. The first thing that we saw was a thing that we have in South Africa, which is called blame storming. So you go and try and find who's responsible for this horrendous incident, and then you try and nail them as best possible. It's a very good example of how the general public, in many instances, views what road freight is. They see it as a real danger, see it as something they don't want on the roads, they see it as something that is a necessary or unnecessary evil, and they come up with this, well, we must move it off. There was a statement as well saying dangerous goods are not supposed to be on the road. You know, those sort of statements are absolutely a good indication of how the general public feels. I think there's a lot of frustration. When you block a road with a 22-meter vehicle, it has a far greater effect on a road than something that's only 2 meters or 3 meters long. And to talk about exactly what happened there is really one of the best ways of showing how the general public feels. Now, there are some reported bits on social media. I'm not going to go down that route. There are 2 things that we need to take away from this incident. And the first is, were all the rules that are required by the operator were those being followed in terms of tracking of the vehicle, etc., etc. So we've got to make sure that we understand exactly what led to that accident and not look for somebody to blame. Look at how we can rectify that so it doesn't happen again. And that's really the big thing. Can't let this happen again. And then secondly, there are also reports on social media about the reaction of the emergency services and aspects around that. And we need to look at that because that is an integral part of dangerous goods operations in terms of local authorities knowing what's moving through their areas of responsibility and having the capability to deal with an incident. Those are the two most important lessons that we must take away from them. Unfortunately, the public will always, for some unknown reason, continually be anti-freight and see freight as being this huge danger on the road, when in reality, hundreds of thousands of trips happen every day, even in your suburb, to your local fuel station, and no incidents happen.
The public is largely anti-freight, but in the South African reality, without road freight, South Africa dies because we have literally no other option at the moment, Justin.
Yeah, correct. I mean, the freight industry in South Africa is critically important to the economy and to business. 80% of our goods, more than 80% of our goods, in fact, is transported on road due to the failing rail system. So as much as the public is anti road freight, it is critical to what they need to survive on a day-to-day basis. And I think once again, it comes back down to awareness, the public awareness. It comes back down to understanding how a heavy goods vehicle operates versus your small sedan or your small SUV or whatever the case may be, and being courteous on the road and understanding all of these different things. And I think also, the proper use of technology for transporters to be able to better manage their vehicles, to better manage their drivers, and ensure that we do have a safer transport sector and safer roads in general.
Mary, I'll have you have the final word. Let me just go through some of the conclusions of Webfleet's study here. 21% of accidents in the road freight industry was because of distracted driving, 12% driver fatigue, 7% speeding, 7% reckless driving, and then 7% poor road conditions. Just in terms of, I'm looking at my message board here and I'm seeing plenty of people frustrated with the truckers themselves, many of them calling them impatient and reckless. If you look at the statistics, 7% of accidents are caused by reckless driving by truckers. What is your message to your members, the members of your association, in terms of noting the importance of what they're carrying as being part of South Africa's literally only freight network, but then also the responsibility that they have with other road users? You have the final word, Mary.
Thank you, Lester. They must understand that at the end of the day, we need to take responsibility, all of us as operators. And it is just unfortunate if we don't want to get involved as to how do we deal with the issues on the road. We need to bring some of the interested operators to assist with the current accident, to say, let us stop them and let us make sure that we can engage differently, because the industry is not regulated, so everybody is doing as they wish. And those technical rules that are in place are the technical rules that are in place because somebody have decided to put them in place. But there is no one that has pinpointed the decision as to how the road freight industry must be operated in South Africa. So as soon as we sit down and put together a document, we are asking our operators to join hands and make sure that there are no accidents that we see on the road.